The atheist YouTuber Viced Rhino says that the gospel writers made a huge mistake when it comes to Palestinian geography. So let's see if his charges stick or if his objections are all wet.
There's one major geographical blunder that Mark makes that seems to have made its way into Matthew and John, and it's one that nobody who was familiar with the region would have made. They refer to the Sea of Galilee as, well, the Sea of Galilee. The locals called it the Lake of Gennesaret. It's not even close to big enough to be called a sea, and the Greek word that Mark, Matthew, and John use to refer to it typically indicates a body of water containing salt water rather than fresh water. And it's fresh water. Luke, however, refuses to use the Greek word for sea that the other Gospels use for this lake, despite using the same word freely in other places of his Gospel. He is also the only Gospel author to use the name Gennesaret for the lake, showing that he is much more familiar with this area than the other authors. Though John is at least aware that Galilee wasn't the common name for the lake, specifying that it is also called the Sea of Tiberias, which was the way the Romans would typically refer to it, though again they would call it a lake rather than a sea.
I have to admit, Rhino seems like he does have a point, as the Jewish historian Josephus also refers to the Sea of Galilee as a lake. So did the evangelists make a huge mistake? Well, I suppose you could say that. But then you'd also have to say that the people who translated the Old Testament from Hebrew into Greek also made a huge mistake, and these were Jews. And then you'd also have to say that the many authors of the Talmud also made the same big mistake. The Talmud, a collection of ancient Jewish texts, often mentions bodies of water like the Sea of Galilee, using the Hebrew word yam, along with specific geographical names like Kinneret or Tiberia. Additionally, the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, translated yam to the Greek word thalassa when referring to the Sea of Galilee, calling it the Sea of Chinnereth in passages like Numbers 34:11, Deuteronomy 3:17, and Joshua 13:27. This choice reflects the Hebrew language was used within Jewish communities when the Talmud was composed and indicates their acceptance of thalassa is a fitting translation for yam. In the Gospels, which were written in Greek and not Hebrew, the Sea of Galilee is consistently referred to as the thalassa, showing a linguistic connection with the Septuagint. This consistency underscores how people at the time understood geographical terms. Considering that the translators of the Septuagint, the diverse authors of the Talmud, and the evangelists all use the term in the same manner, it appears highly unlikely that the evangelists made a major screw-up here. To make a really lame pun, there's just nothing fishy going on here. So what's up with Luke, the author of the third gospel, using the term lake instead of sea? New Testament scholar Peter J. Williams points out something rather interesting. He mentions that for a person from Galilee who didn't travel much, the largest body of fresh water around would be naturally called a sea, without needing to add any extra details. However, he suggests that Luke, who tradition tells us came from Antioch, near the Orontes River and the Mediterranean Sea, might have been more inclined to call it a lake. If Mark's account is based on what Peter remembered, as church tradition tells us, and Matthew and John were written by folks from Galilee, well, it makes sense that they use the local way of talking about it. Also, when you look at John's Gospel, it becomes clear that he was very familiar with the Sea of Galilee. He mentions it in passages like John 6:1 and 21:1, even noting that it had two names, the Sea of Galilee and the Sea of Tiberias, as Rhino mentioned. This two-name situation actually matches up quite nicely with what we find in the historical records. Josephus, for example, tells us that Herod Antipas built the town of Tiberias near the Sea of Galilee and named it after Emperor Tiberius. So John isn't making a mistake here either. So where in the heck is Rhino getting this information from? Well, I can't say for sure, but this particular objection has been around since the 3rd century from a critic named Porphyry, and it seems like skeptics have just been regurgitating it here and there ever since. Porphyry even goes further and says that such a squall is highly unlikely to happen on a lake like Tiberias. He wrote,
"As if this isn't enough, he calls it a sea. Indeed, a stormy sea. A very angry sea which tosses them about in its waves, causing them to fear for their lives." He does this, apparently, so that he can next show Christ miraculously causing the storm to cease and the sea to calm down, hence saving the disciples from the dangers of the swell. It is from fables like this one that we judge the gospel to be a cleverly woven curtain, each thread of which requires careful scrutiny.
problem for Porphyry is that such squalls on the Sea of Galilee are hardly without precedent. To begin with, every year during the spring months, the wind in the Sea of Galilee blows from the east, known as a whistler among the locals in Tiberias. In fact, in May of 2022, such a huge storm hit. Here's the story. It reads, "On the night of May 14th and in the early morning hours of May 15th, strong easterly winds blew in the north of the country, reaching speeds of 80 kilometers per hour, with gusts close to 140 kilometers per hour, causing trees to collapse and block roadways. The strong easterly winds, combined with the high water level of the Sea of Galilee, caused flooding and damage to the promenade of Tiberias. Should be noted that this combination has previously caused such damages, with the most prominent examples occurring in the spring of 1992 and the spring of 1969. The damages along the Sea of Galilee and the surrounding areas amounted to about $50 million worth of damages. So Porphyry's armchair meteorology is just way off base. While such a storm might be rare, it doesn't mean that Mark is just making things up to make theological points. So in a nutshell, Viced Rhino's attempts to water down the historical reliability of the Gospels by saying there's a big lake of a mistake here actually evaporates upon closer examination. Wow, that was a lot of puns in one sentence there. But at any rate, there's just no problem here. And if Rhino wants to pull the whole Spider-Man fallacy card, well, I got a video on that you guys can watch at the end screen. There was a lot of problems with this particular video by Viced Rhino, and I might address some more in the future. But until then, thank you so much for watching.